My name is Chloe Bennett, and if you told me a year ago that my life would become the plot of a trashy daytime television show, I would have laughed. Back then, my life was a carefully curated collection of quiet, happy moments. I was 34, living in a beautifully restored Victorian in Denver's Highlands neighborhood with my husband Ethan. We'd met in a crowded bar during a blizzard in our early 20s. A story so cinematic, we told it at every dinner party. He was a charismatic architect who could talk anyone into anything. I was a data analyst who found comfort in the clean, predictable lines of spreadsheets. We were the perfect balance. Our life was measured in weekend trips to the Rockies, brewery hopping in Reno, and lazy Sundays spent reading in mismatched armchairs. We were planning a future, a tangible thing we'd sketched out on cocktail napkins. A trip to Japan, a Bernese mountain dog named Gus, and a baby we'd been trying for, with mounting frustration, for the past 2 years. Then, one crisp October afternoon, a single phone call blew a hole through the center of my life. Ethan's motorcycle had been hit by a truck that ran a red light on Spear Boulevard. The Denver police officer on the phone was kind, his words cushioned with practiced sympathy, but the message was brutal, instantaneous, no suffering, just gone. In the space of a single breath, I went from a wife to a widow, standing in a funeral home arguing with a stranger about the metallic finish on a cremation urn, because a casket was no longer an option. The weeks that followed were a thick, disorienting fog. I'd wake up to the sharp Colorado sun slicing through the blinds and forget, for one blissful, stupid second. Then the weight of his absence would crash down. A physical pressure in my chest that made it impossible to draw a full breath. My parents, who lived a comfortable, predictable life in a Boulder suburb, were my unexpected anchors. Growing up, I was the steady, reliable daughter, the one who got good grades and never caused any trouble. I was the sturdy foundation upon which the real family drama, starring my younger sister Zoe, was built. My academic scholarships were met with a pleased nod. Zoe's fleeting attempt at acting school got a standing ovation. I was the background, she was the star. But after Ethan's death, the script flipped. Chloe, honey, you're not to worry about a single thing. We'll handle the arrangements, my mother, Margaret, said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. She held me, and for the first time, it didn't feel like a performance. My father, Richard, a man whose primary mode of communication was forwarding articles from the Wall Street Journal, sat with me in silence, a comforting, solid presence. They managed the relentless logistics of death, from the obituary to the catering. It was a level of care so profound, so out of character, that it moved me to tears. When my mother mentioned offhandedly that a recent plumbing disaster had wiped out their emergency fund, I didn't hesitate. Ethan's life insurance payout was significant, and the money felt meaningless, almost vulgar, sitting in my account. I set up a recurring monthly transfer of $4,000 to their bank account. It felt like a small price to pay for the feeling of being looked after. My job at a downtown financial firm was the only thing that kept me from completely unraveling. The rigid logic of market analysis was a welcome antidote to the chaos of grief. Quitting was a tempting fantasy. The estate included our house, a rental condo downtown, and a portfolio that meant I could walk away and never look at a spreadsheet again. But the thought of being alone in that big, silent house, surrounded by Ethan's half-finished projects, and the lingering scent of his cologne on his pillow, was 1,000 times more terrifying than any quarterly report. I arranged to work remotely, a ghost in my own home office. Every Tuesday night, I drove to a support group in a community center near Sloan's Lake. The room always smelled faintly of burnt coffee, but the people there, fellow citizens of the land of grief, understood. I was at the grocery store yesterday, I admitted one evening, my voice cracking, and I saw his favorite brand of IPA, and I put a 6-pack in the cart. I didn't even realize I'd done it until I got to the checkout. A man named Frank, a retired firefighter whose wife had died of a stroke, nodded slowly. I still make enough coffee for 2 every morning, he said. Been a year and a half. The brain's a stubborn muscle. Those meetings became my sanctuary. And for a while, my weekly dinners with my parents in Boulder did too. It was a new dynamic for us. We'd sit on their back patio, looking out at the Flatirons, and they would ask about me. So, that big project you were managing before, what ended up happening with it? My dad asked one night, actually putting his phone away. I found myself lighting up, explaining the complexities of the data model I'd built. We ended up exceeding the projection by 12%, I said, a flicker of my old pride returning. They listened, really listened. And for the first time, I felt like the protagonist of my own story in their eyes. Then Zoe came home. She blew in one Sunday like a Santa Ana wind, 8 months pregnant and glowing with a self-satisfied radiance. She'd been living in a shoebox apartment in Los Angeles, trying to rebrand herself as a spiritual lifestyle coach after her career as a yoga influencer had stalled. I hadn't seen her since the funeral, where she'd hugged me stiffly and spent the rest of the time taking selfies with our cousins. "Zoe Bug, oh my goodness, look at you," my mother exclaimed, rushing to her side and guiding her to the most comfortable chair as if she were a fragile queen. I was, once again, invisible, my colors bleeding into the beige of the dining room wall. "Are you comfortable? Do you need more water? Let me get you a cushion for your back," Mom fussed, her hands fluttering around Zoe's belly. I forced a smile and tried to wade into the conversation. "You look amazing, Zoe. LA life suits you." "It's the aura," Zoe said, placing a hand on her stomach. "The baby and I are just, like, vibrating on a higher frequency right now." I took a sip of wine, biting back a dozen sarcastic remarks. "So, who's the dad? Anyone I know?" I asked, aiming for casual. Zoe's smile tightened. "That's part of my private journey, Chloe," she said, her tone implying I was too unenlightened to understand. "It's not about labels." "Chloe, don't be nosy," my mom chided instantly. "Zoe is handling this with incredible grace. She doesn't need an interrogation." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. I could still feel the sting of their relentless questions about my fertility struggles with Ethan. The unsolicited advice, the pitying looks, the implication that I was somehow failing. But Zoe's vague, fatherless pregnancy was a sacred, spiritual journey. A week later, I tried again, softer this time. "Seriously, Zoe, raising a kid is no joke, especially on your own. If you're worried about money." She cut me off with a smug little laugh. "Oh, don't worry about us," she said, patting her belly. "My baby and I are going to be very well taken care of." My dad beamed at her. "That's our Zoe," he said with a proud chuckle. "Always figures out a way to land on her feet." The steak I was eating suddenly tasted like ash. A month later, Zoe called me. Her voice was like honey laced with saccharin. "Chloe, I'm having my baby shower at Mom and Dad's next month, and it would just mean the world to me if you were there. You're my only sister." I was stunned into silence. "You want me there?" "Of course, silly," she trilled, her laugh sounding thin and forced. "We're family. It's time we started acting like it." Every alarm bell in my head was screaming, but a desperate, foolish part of me wanted to believe her. I wanted that feeling of family back, even a broken version of it. I agreed to go. The day of the shower, I drove to Boulder with a knot of dread in my stomach. I'd brought 2 gifts, a ridiculously expensive stroller system that I knew she'd registered for, and a small, hand-knitted baby blanket in a soft, gender-neutral yellow. I had started knitting it for the baby Ethan and I were supposed to have. Finishing it felt like closing a painful chapter. The house was a sea of pink and gold. Balloons, streamers, and a mountain of gifts dominated the living room. Zoe was holding court, draped in a silk caftan, recounting dramatic stories about her life in LA to a rapt audience of her high school friends. She'd catch my eye occasionally, and her smile was sharp, predatory. We played the stupid games. I guessed the number of cotton balls in a baby bottle and forced a laugh when someone smeared chocolate in a diaper and made us guess the poop candy bar. Through it all, I felt a creeping sense of dread, like the air pressure dropping before a storm. When it was time to open gifts, Zoe was a master performer. She gushed over every item, saving mine for last. She held up the stroller with a squeal of delight, then unfolded the small, yellow blanket. She ran her hand over the soft yarn, her expression unreadable. Then she set it aside, stood up, and tapped a champagne flute with a manicured nail. The room fell silent. "I just want to thank you all for being here," she began, her voice thick with a practiced emotion. This year has been an absolute roller coaster. As you all know, we suffered a terrible loss when Ethan passed. Her eyes found mine, and they were cold, reptilian. And in the midst of all that tragedy, there was a complication. A secret I've had to hold on to protect the people I love. She took a deep, theatrical breath, one hand on her belly. It's time for the truth to come out. It's time for everyone to know who the father of my baby is. The silence in the room was absolute. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Her gaze was locked on me, a cruel, triumphant smile playing on her lips. It's Ethan Vance, my sister's husband. A collective gasp rippled through the room. My vision blurred, the pink and gold decorations swimming in a sickening vortex. And since this baby boy is Ethan's only child, his only heir, Zoe continued, her voice ringing with a chilling clarity. He is entitled to his birthright. That means half of Ethan's entire estate, the house, the condo, the investments, everything. The whispers started then, a venomous hiss spreading through the room. But the real blow came from the sight of my parents, standing on either side of Zoe, their faces not shocked, but resolute. They were her honor guard. They knew this was an ambush, and I had walked right into it. "You're lying," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Zoe's smile was pure poison. She held up her phone, the screen lit with the photo of her and Ethan, his arms wrapped around her, kissing in a bar with a neon sign I didn't recognize. "He was going to leave you, Chloe," she said, her voice loud and clear for everyone to hear. "He loved me. We were going to start a life together. The accident just happened before we could tell you." My mother stepped forward, her expression a mask of gentle concern. "Chloe, darling, you have to do the right thing. For your nephew," my father nodded grimly. "It's about family, Chloe. This is what's fair." I felt the world tilt on its axis. I grabbed my purse, my movements clumsy, robotic. I pushed through the crowd of staring, judging faces and stumbled out the front door into the cold, thin air. I heard my mother call my name, a plaintive cry, but I was already in my car, leaving a mushroom cloud of dust as I sped away from the ruins of my life. That night, Zoe bombarded me with the evidence of her affair. Screenshots of texts from Ethan. "I feel like I can finally breathe when I'm with you. Chloe and I are just roommates now. The magic is gone. I promise I'll tell her. Just let me find the right time. We'll have our life together." The dates confirmed my worst fears. It had been going on for over a year. While I was charting my ovulation cycles, he was with my sister. While I was crying over negative pregnancy tests, he was telling her he loved her. The next morning, my father called. His voice was cold, all business. "We've spoken to a lawyer, Chloe. Zoe has a very strong claim. You can make this easy, or you can make this very, very difficult and public." "How could you?" I choked out. "How could you know and say nothing?" "We were in an impossible situation," my mother cut in, her voice rising with defensive tears. "She's our daughter. She was pregnant and scared and alone. And what am I?" I screamed into the phone. "What the hell am I to you? We were trying to protect you," my father insisted. "Protect me?" I laughed, a raw, ugly sound. "You stood by and watched her light a match to my life. You handed her the gasoline." I ended the call and blocked their numbers, my hand shaking with a rage so pure it felt like a cleansing fire. Then I opened my banking app and canceled the $4,000 monthly transfer with a vicious tap of my finger. I hired David Chen, one of the best estate lawyers in Denver. He was blunt. "They have a strong narrative," he said, looking over the text Zoe's lawyer had forwarded. "A grieving, pregnant woman. A secret love affair. Juries eat that stuff up. We have a fight on our hands." The weeks that followed were a living hell. I was served with a lawsuit. The whispers in my small, gossipy industry were deafening. I tried to work, but I'd find myself staring at a wall for hours, the betrayal replaying in my mind on a continuous loop. Finally, I took an official leave of absence. One night, drowning my sorrows in a bottle of expensive whiskey Ethan had been saving, my phone rang with an unknown number from a California area code. "Am I speaking with Chloe Bennett?" a woman's voice asked. It was warm, but hesitant. Who's asking? My name is Catherine Vance. I am Ethan's mother. The glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Ethan's story, the one he'd told me and everyone else, was that his parents had died in a hiking accident when he was a child, and he'd been raised by an indifferent aunt. Another lie. The foundation of his entire life was a lie. We need to talk, she said. There's something you deserve to know. We met the following week at a quiet hotel bar downtown. The moment she walked in, I knew. She had Ethan's eyes, the same startling shade of green, and the same charismatic tilt to her smile. I'm so sorry, she said, her own eyes filling with tears. I saw the obituary, but I couldn't bring myself to come to the funeral. Ethan and we hadn't spoken in almost 10 years. She told me a story of a charming, brilliant, but deeply troubled son, a pathological liar who left a trail of broken promises and unpaid debts. She'd finally had to cut him off for her own sanity. He was a wonderful man in so many ways, she said, her voice full of a mother's complicated grief. But his relationship with the truth was flexible. Then she pushed a faded envelope across the table. He sent me a box of his old things years ago when he was trying to get money from me. I think this was in it. Inside was a medical file from UCLA Medical Center, dated 2 years before I'd even met Ethan. I scanned the document, my eyes catching on a single, circled phrase. Bilateral congenital absence of the vas deferens. A doctor's note at the bottom was brutally clear. Patient's condition results in permanent, irreversible sterility. He had known. He had known all along. He had let me inject my body with hormones, endure countless invasive tests, and blame myself for our inability to conceive. He had held me while I cried, all the while knowing it was his lie, not my body. That was the problem. The cruelty of it took my breath away. The day of the court hearing, I felt strangely calm. Zoe was there, dressed in a somber black dress, the baby in a carrier strapped to her chest. She looked every bit the tragic Madonna. My parents sat behind her, their faces grim and supportive. Zoe gave a tearful, compelling testimony about her secret love for Ethan. It was a masterpiece of fiction. When it was our turn, David Chen simply presented the medical records. Your Honor, we have definitive proof that Ethan Vance was sterile and could not have fathered this or any child. We request a court-ordered paternity test to settle this matter. Zoe's lawyer objected, but Zoe herself let out a strangled cry. He's lying. Those documents are fake. David then turned to the gallery. The defense calls Catherine Vance to the stand. You could have heard a pin drop as Catherine, elegant and composed, made her way to the front of the courtroom. Her very existence dismantled the narrative of Ethan, the orphan. I will gladly provide a DNA sample, Catherine said, her voice steady, to confirm whether or not this child is my grandson. The color drained from Zoe's face. The judge, his expression unreadable, ordered the test. When we returned to court 3 weeks later, the conclusion was clinical and swift. The lab results showed a 0% chance that the baby was Catherine's grandchild. He was not Ethan's son. It was over. Zoe broke down on the stand, her carefully constructed facade crumbling into a pathetic, sobbing confession. The father was a musician she'd had a one-night stand with in LA. He wanted nothing to do with her or the baby. When Ethan died, she saw a lifeline. She saw his money. The judge's voice was like ice. He dismissed her lawsuit and spoke directly to her about the malicious and fraudulent nature of her claim. Outside, in the hallway, my parents intercepted me. Chloe, we didn't know she was lying about that part. My mother wept. We just thought, you thought you'd back the horse you thought would win, I said. My voice devoid of emotion. You always have. We need your help, my father said, his voice low. The property taxes are due, and since you stopped the payments, I just looked at them, at these two people who had so thoroughly failed me, and I felt nothing. I walked away without another word. Catherine was waiting for me. How are you holding up? She asked. A real, genuine laugh bubbled up from my chest. I think, I said, feeling the sun on my face. I'm going to be okay. A month later, I gave Catherine the keys to the downtown condo. A fresh start for you, I said. She had given me the truth, a gift more valuable than any property. She hugged me, and in her arms, I felt the kind of unconditional maternal love I'd been craving my entire life. "I never had a daughter," she whispered. "That was 6 months ago. I sold the house, the one filled with too many beautiful lies, and moved into a sleek, modern apartment with a view of the mountains. I have dinner with Catherine every Sunday. We're piecing together the two different Ethans we knew, finding a complicated piece in the truth. I'm back at my job, leading my team, finding satisfaction in the clean certainty of numbers. My old family has tried to reach out. I've received letters, emails, texts from unknown numbers. I delete them all without reading. Next weekend, I'm driving up to Rocky Mountain National Park. I'm going to hike a trail I've never been on before, alone. I lost the family I was born into, but I found a new one in the wreckage. This isn't the life I planned, not even close, but it's mine, and I'm finally the one writing the story.
My name is Alara Vance, and at 37, I live my life in spreadsheets and skylines. My world is the thrumming heart of Charlotte, North Carolina, a city built on ambition and banking, now sprawling ever outward with the very suburbs and skyscrapers my company erects. The condo I share with my husband, Nolan, is a testament to that success, a sleek, glass-walled space on the 45th floor, owned by his family's company Vanguard Developments. From here, you can see the whole city, a glittering kingdom of steel and light. Vanguard pulls in billions a year, a titan of construction in the Southeast, founded by my formidable father-in-law Arthur Pierce. I never planned on this life. I never imagined myself in a hard hat, arguing logistics with a site foreman, or in a boardroom, dissecting multi-million-dollar contracts. My roots are buried in the cold, hard soil of the Rust Belt, in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of bleach and my mother's exhaustion. She was a ghost in my childhood, a blur of motion working 2 jobs, a nurse's aide by day, a cleaner of sterile office buildings by night. She was a single mother who taught me that the world doesn't give you anything for free. She taught me to be sharp, to see the angles, and to never, ever let anyone mistake your kindness for weakness. That grit was my inheritance. It powered me through a state university on a full scholarship and landed me a coveted job in investment banking. I loved the cold, hard logic of it. The numbers were a language, and I was fluent. They told stories of risk and reward, of folly and genius. If you just knew how to listen. I was good at it, and I was on a fast track. I thought that would be my story. Then I met Nolan Pierce. He was different from the aggressive, fast-talking finance guys I was used to. He had a gentle, unassuming charm, a quiet confidence that came from a life without struggle. He'd grown up in a world of privilege I could barely imagine, with a trust fund and a last name that opened every door. He was kind and handsome, and when he looked at me, I felt seen for something other than my ambition. I thought maybe my story could change. Maybe it could soften. I pictured a different life. One as a homemaker, building a family, trading boardrooms for playdates. For a while, that dream felt real, tangible. But dreams built on faulty foundations are the first to crumble. Nolan is my opposite in every fundamental way. Where I am driven, he drifts. Where I see a challenge, he sees an obstacle to his comfort. His father, Arthur Pierce, is a legend. He built Vanguard Developments from a small, local outfit into a juggernaut, a brilliant, ruthless businessman who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. He'd spent decades grooming Nolan to take over, to be the heir to the throne. The problem was, Nolan never wanted the crown. I remember one Tuesday evening, maybe a year into our marriage. I was on my laptop, deconstructing a complex merger proposal for the bank, my mind buzzing with figures. Nolan was sprawled on our designer sectional, a masterpiece of Italian leather, mindlessly flipping through channels, landing on some vapid reality show about impossibly wealthy people complaining about their impossibly perfect lives. He let out a soft sigh. "I could never do what my dad does," he said to the television. "All that stress, all those decisions." He finally turned to me, his expression not regretful but relieved. "I'm just not cut out to be a CEO, Ela. I'd just be a figurehead, signing what they tell me to sign. It's easier that way." I stared at him, the tapping of my keys falling silent. A cold knot formed in my stomach. How could someone be so content to be a passenger in their own life? I am wired to drive. Decisions come to me like breathing. I assess, I calculate, I trust my gut, and I execute. My mother used to joke I was born with a calculator in one hand and a 5-year plan in the other. When I married Nolan, my plan had been to leave my high-stress banking career to focus on us. But my father-in-law had other ideas. A few months after our wedding, Arthur called me into his office. It was a cavernous room, paneled in dark mahogany, smelling of leather and old money. The walls were covered in blueprints of landmark buildings and framed awards. He was an intimidating presence, with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "Ilera," he began, his voice a low rumble. "I've reviewed your portfolio. Your work at the bank is impressive. You have a head for numbers and a spine of solid steel. This company needs that. Nolan is my son, but he doesn't have the fire you do. Come work for us." I hesitated. I remembered my dream of a quieter life, a family, of stepping off the corporate ladder. But the challenge in his eyes, the undisguised respect from a man like Arthur Pierce, was a siren song I couldn't resist. I said yes. And that single word detonated my life. At first, it was a slow burn. I was just another executive, learning the labyrinthine world of construction timelines, material sourcing, labor negotiations, zoning laws. But Arthur saw something in me. He became my mentor. He started inviting me to board meetings, initially just to observe. The board was a classic old boys club, a collection of silver-haired men in expensive suits who had been with Arthur for decades. The first time I walked in, you could feel their skepticism. The founder's pretty young daughter-in-law, a banker no less. I was an outsider, a novelty. Then Arthur started asking for my input. "Ela, what's your take on the projected ROI for the Riverwalk project?" He'd ask, putting me on the spot. I didn't shrink. I had done my homework. I had spent nights poring over every financial statement, every supplier contract, every budget projection until the numbers danced in my head. So I spoke up. "The ROI is solid, I'd say, my voice steady, but our materials cost is inflated by 12%. Our primary steel supplier is marking us up compared to market averages. We can renegotiate or diversify our suppliers. I've already identified 2 alternatives that could save us close to $8 million in the next fiscal year alone." Silence. Then, slow nods. Frowns of skepticism turned into looks of consideration. Slowly, grudgingly, I earned their respect. They started seeking me out, deferring to my judgment on financial calls. I was good at this. I thrived on it. Nolan, however, was a ghost. He held the title of Executive Vice President, a seat on the board gifted to him by his father, but he was rarely there. He'd skip crucial meetings, claiming they were too technical or that he had a client lunch, which was usually code for a round of golf at the country club. The board never said a word. His father's legacy gave him a lifetime hall pass. The chasm between us grew wider with every deal I closed. One night, I came home after a marathon 14-hour day spent hammering out a contentious new labor agreement. My head was buzzing with adrenaline and exhaustion. I found Nolan on the couch, in the exact same spot, controller in hand, playing a video game. "Why weren't you at the quarterly review today?" I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. I dropped my briefcase on the floor with a heavy thud. "You're a board member, Nolan. You're supposed to be a part of this." He didn't even pause his game. "You've got it covered, Ella," he said, his eyes glued to the screen. "They listen to you, not me. It's better this way." His casual indifference was like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about the company anymore. It was about us. He was checking out not just from his legacy, but from our marriage. I threw myself deeper into my work. It was my refuge, the one place where I felt competent and in control, the one place where my efforts yielded clear, tangible results. With every step I climbed at Vanguard, Nolan seemed to drift further away, and a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety started to vibrate under my skin. Something was about to break. By the time Arthur Pierce announced his retirement, I was the de facto chief operating officer. He remained chairman of the board, but I was running the day-to-day operations. The board didn't just lean on me, they relied on me. I felt a fire in my chest. This was what I was meant to do. Growing up, I'd watched my mom scrape by to keep a roof over our heads. Now, I was leading a company that employed thousands of people, families who counted on Vanguard to keep their own roofs over their heads. That responsibility was a heavy, sacred weight. Nolan, meanwhile, was an apparition in his own life. He'd show up at the office a few mornings a week in a perfectly pressed shirt, exchange pleasantries, and be gone by noon. I'd come home to find him napping or watching sports. "Nolan, this is your legacy," I'd plead. my voice taut with a frustration that had become my constant companion. "Your father built this from nothing. Don't you want to be a part of it?" He'd give me that same infuriating, lazy shrug. "You're doing great without me, Ella." It stung. It felt like he was opting out of us. Our conversations became a barren landscape of small talk. The weather, groceries, traffic. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling of our multi-million-dollar condo, feeling utterly, completely alone. Then my stepsister, Sloane, blew back into town like a hurricane. Sloane is 3 years older, a whirlwind of charisma, designer clothes, and razor-sharp edges. We weren't raised together, but we shared a roof for a few turbulent years after my mom married her dad, a gruff long-haul trucker who didn't stick around long. Sloane learned early on how to use her charm and looks as currency. She was always chasing something bigger, shinier. Her latest prize had been a hotshot lawyer from a wealthy Dallas family. Their marriage ended in a spectacular dumpster fire when she cheated on him. The scandal was messy, and her ex, a man with a flair for the dramatic, stormed into our parents' house, threatening lawsuits and screaming about betrayal. I was swamped with a potential acquisition deal, so Nolan went to handle it. It was one of the few things he was genuinely good at, diffusing tension with his calm, steady presence. Sloane was endlessly effusive afterward, calling me to gush. "Your husband is just amazing, Ella." He handled Chad like a pro, so calm, so in control. I brushed it off, too buried in spreadsheets to give it a second thought, but that incident changed how Sloane saw Nolan. To her, he wasn't just my laid-back, unambitious husband anymore. He was Nolan Pierce, the sole heir to the Vanguard Development's fortune, a golden ticket. She had no idea his title was ceremonial, a courtesy from his father. Sloane has always been drawn to the magnetic pull of wealth. Her ex-husband's high six-figure salary hadn't been enough to keep her loyal, but it was why she'd married him in the first place. Now, freshly divorced and drowning in alimony payments she had to make, she was on the hunt. I was too blind to see it, too consumed by work. I didn't notice the way she started lingering around Nolan, her laughter a little too loud at his jokes, the constant stream of texts about catching up. One Thursday evening, I came home, my mind still spinning from a day of intense negotiations. Nolan was waiting in the living room. The television was off. His usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a heavy, unreadable expression. "Ela, we need to talk," he said. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. Nolan never sounded serious. I sat down on the edge of the armchair opposite him, bracing myself. "Sloane is pregnant," he said, his gaze fixed on the expensive Persian rug. "It's mine." I want a divorce. The words didn't compute. They were just sounds, hanging in the air-conditioned silence of the room. Pregnant? Divorce? My mind reeled, a chaotic slideshow of images. Sloane laughing at our wedding, Nolan shrugging on the couch, my stepsister, my husband. I wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter something. But years of boardroom discipline took over. I pushed the emotion down, locking it away in a cold, dark box. All I could manage to ask was, "When is she coming here to discuss this?" He mumbled something about my next day off, a Saturday. I nodded, numb. The fog of shock was already beginning to clear, replaced by the ice-cold clarity of strategic thinking. I had to protect my position. I had to protect everything I had built. The next morning, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel of my car, I drove out to the sprawling Pierce estate in one of Charlotte's most exclusive suburbs. Arthur was in his study. I laid it all out for him: Nolan's affair, Sloane's pregnancy, the impending divorce. His wife, Eleanor, who had been hovering nearby, gasped, her eyes lighting up with the giddy, inappropriate delight of a long-awaited grandchild. One sharp, withering look from Arthur silenced her. He leaned back in his leather chair, his face a granite mask. He was silent for a long, heavy minute. Then, a slow, grim smile touched his lips. "Alara," he said, his voice firm, "you are the heart and soul of this company. I don't give a damn what my son does in his personal life. You keep running things. You have my full support. I will handle Nolan." Relief washed over me, so potent it almost brought me to my knees. It was a cold comfort. He was choosing his legacy over his own son. But for me, it was a lifeline. When Saturday came, Sloane arrived at the condo looking like the cat who had swallowed the canary. She sauntered in, her designer handbag swinging like a trophy. "Ela, she began, her voice dripping with the vilest, most condescending pity. "I am just so sorry you and Nolan couldn't have kids. But don't you worry, I'll make sure you get a very generous settlement. Enough to start over somewhere new. Just leave this place. Leave Charlotte. It'll be easier for everyone." She gestured around the condo as if she already owned it. Nolan sat on the couch, silent and blank, a spectator at the demolition of his own life. I almost laughed. The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it. She thought she was stealing a billionaire's lifestyle. I kept my composure, channeling the same icy focus I used to dismantle hostile takeover bids. "A divorce is fine," I said, my voice perfectly level, "but we'll need lawyers to sort out alimony and the division of assets. And Sloane," I added, looking her directly in the eye, "are you quite sure Nolan is the prize you think he is?" Her eyes narrowed, but she just waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I know what I have, Ela. Nolan's got everything I'll ever need." I held back a smirk. She had no idea. She thought he was the president, the heir, sitting on a personal fortune. She didn't know the condo was company property. She didn't know his executive salary, a vanity stipend from his father, barely covered his country club dues. I had been paying for our life, our bills, our vacations, for years. The official divorce negotiation was set for the following week. I hired the sharpest corporate lawyer in the city, a woman named Miss Chen, who was known for being a shark in a Chanel suit. We met in a sleek conference room at the Vanguard headquarters, the city skyline, a glittering backdrop. Sloane strutted in, all bravado, with Nolan trailing behind her like a lost puppy. "All right, Rachel," Sloane began before anyone else could speak, tossing her hair back. "Let's not drag this out. Name your price for alimony. I'll make sure Nolan takes care of you." Miss Chen simply raised an elegant eyebrow. She slid a document across the polished mahogany table. "Since your client is so generously offering," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "we will be filing a claim for alimony from Mr. Pierce. And given the circumstances of the dissolution of this marriage, we will also be pursuing a claim against you, Miss Masters, for alienation of affection." Sloane's jaw dropped. "Me? You can't do that. I'm already paying alimony to my ex," she sputtered. I leaned back, watching the first cracks appear in her smug facade. My mother's voice echoed in my head. People who chase shortcuts always end up tripping over their own feet. Next came the property. "This condo is Pierce family property," Sloane declared, trying to regain control. "It's not part of the marital assets." "You are correct," Miss Chen replied without missing a beat. "The condo and the land it sits on is an asset of Vanguard Developments. The company decides who resides there." Nolan blinked. "Wait, I thought Dad owned it personally," he mumbled. Sloane's face went pale. "So, we can't live there?" "You certainly can, miss," Chen said crisply, "if the company's acting CEO approves your lease application." She paused, then glanced pointedly at me. I watched the dawning horror spread across Sloane's face as the truth finally hit her like a physical blow. "Hold on," Sloane said, whipping her head around to face Nolan. "You're not the CEO." I decided it was time for me to speak. "I am Sloane," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm the acting CEO. Arthur made me president when he retired. Nolan is a senior advisor. He holds no executive power. The board trusts me to run this company." Nolan wouldn't meet my eyes. Sloane's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're joking," she hissed at him. "You let me believe you were the boss." He just shrugged. That same infuriating, passive shrug that had defined our entire marriage. Miss Chen, clearly enjoying herself, slid another document across the table. "Here is the standard employee lease agreement for the penthouse unit. As you can see, it is leased at the current market rate." The number on the page was astronomical. Nolan's eyes went wide. "My salary can't cover a quarter of that," he whispered, mostly to himself. Sloane looked like she'd been slapped. She had walked in here believing she had won the lottery. Now she was staring at a future of crushing debt and a powerless broke partner. My salary had been quietly covering our expenses for years. We had no joint savings to split. The divorce would be clean, but for them, it would be brutal. I walked out of that room feeling 100 pounds lighter. The fallout was swift and spectacular. A few weeks later, word got back to the Pierce family that Sloane's pregnancy claim had been a complete fabrication. She had faked the entire thing to trap Nolan, hoping his family's wealth would solve her financial problems. Eleanor was devastated. Arthur was livid. The atmosphere at the Pierce estate became suffocatingly toxic. Dinners were held in dead silence, broken only by the heavy clink of silverware against porcelain. Eleanor, Nolan's mother, often wept silently, while Arthur remained as frigid as a block of ice, his gaze never lingering on Sloane for more than a second. Desperation finally pushed Sloane to her limit. One afternoon, she found Arthur in his study, trying to muster the most pathetic tears she could. "Father," she sobbed, her voice trembling, "I know I made a terrible mistake, but Chad, my ex-husband, he's threatening to sue me if I don't pay the alimony. I don't have a penny to my name. Please, for the honor of the Pierce family name, please help me." Arthur didn't even look up from the ledger he was reviewing. He let the silence stretch on, making Sloane squirm. Finally, he slowly raised his head, his eyes as sharp as daggers. "Honor?" he repeated, his voice low and cold. "You used to lie about a grandchild that never existed to try and claw your way into this family. You have ruined my son. Do you think you have the right to speak of honor in this house?" But Nolan loves me," Sloane stammered, a final, feeble attempt. Arthur laughed, a dry and merciless sound. "Nolan doesn't know what love is. He only knows how to take the easiest path. And you were that path." He stood, walked around his desk, and stopped directly in front of the trembling Sloane. He spoke definitively, each word a hammer blow bolting the final door shut. "You are nothing to this family." Sloane couldn't handle it. The next morning, she packed a few things, left a hastily scrawled note for Nolan filled with bitter accusations, and then vanished without another word. She had arrived with nothing, and she left with nothing, leaving Nolan alone to face the wreckage. A few weeks later, Nolan came to me. He showed up at the door of my new apartment in Midtown, a much more modest place than the penthouse, but it was peaceful, and it was entirely mine. He looked gaunt, his expensive suit now hanging loosely on his frame, his usual confidence replaced by a pathetic desperation. "Ella," he pleaded, his eyes watering, "please, can we try again? I made a mistake. My dad cut off my credit cards and demoted me. I don't know what to do." I laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but one born of sheer, exhausted disbelief. He wasn't even apologizing for betraying me. He was just lamenting his own circumstances. "A mistake, Nolan?" I said calmly. "That wasn't a mistake, it was a series of choices. You chose to cheat on me with my own stepsister. But the truth is, you chose to check out of our marriage long before Sloane ever showed up. You chose ease over responsibility, passivity over effort." I took a step back, my hand on the doorknob. "You never really lost anything, Nolan, because you never built anything yourself. Everything you had was given to you, and now that it's been taken away, you realize how empty you truly are." I looked him straight in the eye, my voice devoid of any remaining emotion. "I'm done." I closed the door, the sound echoing like a final, definitive period. Just as Arthur had promised, he had handled Nolan. The title of executive vice president was stripped away. Nolan was now an entry-level compliance analyst, working in a windowless office in the basement. The one-time heir to Vanguard Developments was now just another anonymous cog in the massive machine I was running. And sometimes, when I send a company-wide memo, I scroll through the recipient list and see his name near the bottom. And I find myself smiling. The heir to Vanguard Developments was now just another cog in the machine I was running. And I was running it well. Running this company wasn't just a job, it was my calling. Every new project, every signed contract felt like a promise kept to my mom, to the little girl in the cramped apartment who dreamed of a different life. Our profits soared. My father-in-law became my closest confidant, our relationship forged in the fire of his son's failure. "You're doing what I always hoped Nolan would," he told me once, his eyes filled with a pride that meant more to me than any stock option. "I don't think about remarriage. My heart has been through a meat grinder. For now, I'm married to my work, to the thousands of employees who depend on this company. Their trust is the foundation I build on. I learned what it means to stand tall when the world tries to knock you down. Sloane and Nolan are just a distant memory, a painful but necessary lesson.